Hey everyone, welcome to Talk of the Town. This is a podcast where we talk about all things media, creators, business, and more. My name is Tristan. I'm the host of the podcast. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, thank you for tuning in. And if you are returning from previous episodes of the podcast, thank you so much for tuning back into new episodes of the podcast. We're coming back after a little bit of a short hiatus, and there's been a lot to talk about over the last few weeks and so forth, but especially the last week in the world of entertainment and business is in a firestorm. And there's a lot that we're going to talk about specifically in this episode. But before we also get into this episode, I want to let you guys know that we launched a newsletter on Beehive, which is a really amazing platform. And the cool thing about it is that if you're not able to listen to the podcast and you like newsletters, we'll talk about everything that is, discussed on the podcast, but also some other topics in business and entertainment and all sorts of different areas. So you're getting the best of both worlds, more content, and as well another way to engage with the podcast. So with that being said, guys, let's get into today's episode. First off, guys, we need to discuss about the big elephant in the room happening in the entertainment industry, and that is the writer's strike. Now, many of you guys probably have been seeing it across social media and sources like The Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, Variety, etc., that the Writers Guild of America went on strike earlier last week, and it is now in a really interesting period of time where there are a lot of shows that have been getting basically postponed. There's been a lot of shows that are getting shut down, and at the same time, seeing a lot of interesting movement happening in other areas as well. For instance, the Actors Equity Association is now being part of it. And also, there's the belief that the Directors Guild is going to be starting contract talks this coming Wednesday. So it is really intriguing across the board. Now, the big thing that I want to talk about specifically within the context of this episode is that it came out within the last couple of days that a lot of studios are now moving to suspend the overall deals that a lot of writers and showrunners have for TV and streaming, specifically like their overall and their first look agreements are being suspended. Um, there's not really a lot of commenting or sort of confirmation of this happening, but a lot of people in Hollywood, specifically people who I've been talking to and I've been hearing from, are saying that Warner Brothers, Universal, CBS, Disney, and Sony have basically been sending out messages and notifications to representatives or informally sending out emails and things like that, where basically this is happening. We even know that David Simon, who had been writing for HBO for the last 25 years, is basically getting his deal suspended. Amazon Studios is going to be sending out letters very soon for those under overall and first look deals. Netflix hasn't, which is, I think, very interesting, but they're very easily considering it. And this also comes on the heels that uh, a lot of big studios informed writers and producers that they are expected to continue producing services during the WGA strike, but a lot of showrunners are really shooting back against that, saying there's no non-writing aspect to what they do. And I think it's really intriguing across the board to see this happening. And overall, I am intrigued to see what I think are going to happen. Um, some other things that have come out as well is that um, more specifically, Disney and Warner Brothers are among studios that are continuing payments to producers who have series in production, which I think is a really great thing. We've seen CBS not suspending term deals for those writers and producers. And then also like Amazon Studios has that as well. And Sony has actually been offering weekly rates between 5 to 10K for writers and producers under suspended deals to do producing services, while continuing to pay overall deal related development executives and things of that nature. So I think that it's very intriguing, and there's a lot that we'll probably see happening in the future. But I'd love to see what you guys think about this on social media or in the Q&As or polls. Let me know what you guys think about that. So there we go. Now, moving on to our second topic, we're going to be talking about Warner Brothers Discovery, because for all the good and bad, I've talked about David Zaslav and some of the great decisions, bad decisions that he has made. There's no denying that he has somehow really reinvigorated the brand of Warner Brothers. And specifically, it's streaming, which many of you know. Streaming services are widely not profitable, right? Disney Plus, Paramount Plus, Hulu, Netflix, all these others are bleeding money really badly. Well, David Zaslav came out on a earnings call earlier this week and basically said that the company's US streaming operations are no longer bleeding after posting a $50 million profit for the first quarter of the year. Specifically, the EBITDA spike is really good news for WBD, as places like Deadline are reporting, as they're gearing up to launch, this new streaming service, Max. Really dumb name, but regardless, they're launching it at the end of the end of the month, and on top of that, subscription service has been up for them as well. So I think that's really nice. And specifically, one of the things that David Zaslav has said, and I quote, "When you run a business, you're looking for growth, which we're going to get into the streaming business. We're striving to get throughout the company as the economy approves. But the key is that the US streaming business is no longer bleeding." And I think that's really, really great, right? And ultimately they're going to be adding new types of content and really trying to grow over time. So I think that this is actually a really great thing for Warner Brothers Discovery. And ultimately it'll be very intriguing to see what this means for HBO Max and for Discovery Plus and all these other services under Warner Brothers Discovery, and the future of that as well. So, with that being said, guys, let's get into our third topic for this episode. And this has to do, I think, really interesting with Amazon Studios is now launching its own distribution company. Now, basically, for those that don't remember, a couple years ago, Amazon made a really unprecedented move to acquire MGM, right? The well-known film and TV production studio. And they've decided now to basically launch Amazon MGM Studios distribution. The idea of this is that it will focus primarily on flexible bundles of content where they can send them out to different people, and at the same time, really, do something, I think, unique. So they said that at the launch, the division will offer Amazon originals, including things like Bliss, the Borat subsequent movie film, Coming to America, The Tomorrow War, The Tender Bar, The Marvelous Miss Maisel, Hunters, Goliath, and all sorts of other things that will be either syndicated domestically or shopped internationally. And then they're also going to be handling sales of franchises like Creed, Rocky, the James Bond franchise, as well as a series like Vikings, Fargo, Hotel Cocaine, and The Handmaid's Tale. So I think that's actually very intriguing to see the fact that Amazon is licensing out these television and film projects to third party companies and platforms and all sorts of things, because this is something where Amazon has tended to keep these exclusive to their platform, but now they're going to be really going back to that mixed model of streaming and licensing that we've seen a lot of the broadcast networks do from time to time. So I think it's very intriguing. I am really excited to see what Amazon is doing in the television and the film space. There's rumors that they could be trying to buy AMC or some other kind of movie theater chain as a way to, uh, even create more revenue and more value for the company from an entertainment perspective. So I think that that's a very intriguing thing, across the board. I'd love to know what you guys think about that as well, everyone. And then lastly, guys, for our final topic of this episode, I've talked about it in the past on previous episodes that Paramount has really had such a vast amount of brands underneath it, both good and bad for itself in terms of a company. And one of the things that Paramount has decided recently that they wanted to try and get rid of is BET Media Group, right? Which is, primarily its big, you media brand catering to African Americans and all sorts of different types of content. But what's really intriguing is seeing some of the names that have been flying out to create bids for BET, and one of the more recently interesting groups of people that are among the bidders now include Shaquille O'Neal, Kenya Barris, and the rapper 50 Cent, which I think is really intriguing. Sources have said that the three of them have teamed up with a company called Group Black, which aims to invest and grow black-owned media groups, and as well, they're also teaming up with private equity firm CVC Capital Partners and Authentic Brands, which develops and licenses brands to retail operators. So I think that's really intriguing. Basically, this is a really intriguing move by, again, not just Paramount, by selling brands that are essentially non-core but have really been a big part of their history for quite some time. But it's also a really intriguing move by Shaquille O'Neal, Kenya Barris, and 50 Cent to go after this. I actually think that this is probably the best group of investors or individuals who have wanted to buy BET that have come out after the news broke of wanting to divest from BET. So I think it's actually a very, very smart strategy on their part, and I really look forward to seeing what happens with BET and everything moving forward. So with that being said, everyone, this is the end of the podcast. If you did enjoy the episode, please make sure to give a rating on whatever platform you're listening to this on. It really means a lot to myself and everyone working on the podcast. Again, if you want to support the podcast on social media, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. The links are going to be in the show notes down below, as well as our sponsors for this episode of the podcast are going to be in the show notes. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, we have a newsletter that you guys can subscribe to. It is free for you guys, and we'll cover everything that we talked about in this episode of the podcast, as well as some other things that we didn't talk about in this episode. So, with that being said, everyone, my name is Tristan, the host of the podcast. We'll see all of you next.